The loneliness no one talks about after retirement. Part 1: When the noise finally disappears. Every morning at exactly 6:15, I still wake up without an alarm. Some habits become part of your bones. Even when life changes, your body remembers. For more than 40 years, I lived by the clock. Monday looked almost the same as Thursday. Winter felt no different from summer. I had meetings to attend, problems to solve, deadlines to meet, and people waiting for me before I even walked through the door. Back then, I often dreamed about retirement. I imagined slow mornings, long walks, coffee that never had to be finished in a hurry, afternoons with books I never had time to read, evenings without stress following me home. Retirement looked like freedom. At least that's what I believed. Then the day finally arrived. There were handshakes, photographs, a farewell speech that made everyone laugh. Someone gave me a beautiful watch engraved with the words, "Thank you for your years of service." I smiled, I shook every hand. I promised we would stay in touch. As I carried the small box to my car, I remember feeling strangely light. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I had no idea it was also the first day of a silence I had never experienced before. The first week was wonderful. I slept longer. My wife smiled more because I finally had time for breakfast. Neighbors congratulated me. Friends joked that I was the lucky one. "You've escaped," one of them laughed. I laughed too. For the first time in decades, I belonged to no schedule except my own. Then the second week arrived. The phone rang less often. Emails stopped completely. The messages that once filled my mornings slowly disappeared. At first, I didn't notice. After all, everyone was busy. I understood that, or at least I told myself I did. One Tuesday morning, I found myself standing by the living room window. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars flowed down the street like a river that never rested. Young parents hurried their children into school. Office workers carried coffee cups in one hand and hope in the other. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be, except me. For the first time since I was a young man, nobody was expecting me anywhere. That realization didn't arrive like lightning. It settled quietly like dust on old furniture. You don't notice dust collecting day after day. Then one morning, sunlight enters the room from a different angle. And suddenly you see how much has been there all along. That was loneliness, not dramatic, not loud. Not painful enough to make you cry. Just quiet enough to slowly change the way you looked at the world. People often think loneliness means having nobody around. That isn't true. My wife was still with me. My children called every Sunday. Neighbors waved when we crossed paths. The grocery cashier smiled politely. I wasn't alone, but somehow, I still felt lonely. It took me almost 2 years to understand the difference. Being alone is a physical condition. Loneliness is an emotional one. One can be peaceful. The other slowly empties your spirit. I wish someone had warned me that retirement doesn't only change your schedule, it changes your identity. For decades, I had answered one simple question without thinking. So, what do you do? The answer came naturally. I told people my profession, my position, the organization where I worked. Sometimes they nodded with respect, sometimes curiosity, sometimes admiration. Without realizing it, I had spent 40 years introducing myself through my work. Then one afternoon, a young man sitting next to me in a coffee shop asked that same familiar question. "So, what do you do?" I paused. Longer than I expected. Finally, I smiled awkwardly. "Oh, I'm retired." He nodded politely. The conversation moved on. But inside me, something felt strangely empty. Retired. Was that really who I was now? Just one word. A word that described what I no longer did, not who I had become. That evening, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror longer than usual. The wrinkles weren't new, neither was the gray hair. What frightened me wasn't getting older. It was realizing that somewhere along the road, I had spent decades building a career, without spending enough time building the person behind it. Maybe that's why retirement feels so different for each of us. Some people retire from a job. Others retire from the only identity they have ever known. And when that identity disappears, the silence begins to ask questions no meeting, no deadline, and no paycheck ever had time to ask. Who are you? When nobody needs your title anymore, who are you? When your calendar is empty, who are you? When applause has faded, business cards are gone, and tomorrow belongs only to you, those questions haunted me. Not because I couldn't answer them, but because I had never stopped long enough to ask them. Looking back now, I no longer believe retirement was the beginning of my loneliness. I believe it simply removed the noise that had been covering it for years. The office had kept me busy. Responsibilities had kept me distracted. Achievements had kept me occupied. When all of that disappeared, I was finally left alone with the one person I had been avoiding my entire life. Myself, and strangely enough, that painful meeting would become the most important conversation I would ever have. Part 2: When the world stops calling your name. There was a time when my phone never seemed to rest. It buzzed during breakfast. It rang while I was driving. It interrupted family dinners. Back then, I often complained about it. Can't they solve anything without me? I would say, pretending to be annoyed. Secretly, I enjoyed feeling needed. Every ringing phone carried the same invisible message: you matter. Sometimes it was a colleague asking for advice. Sometimes it was someone who needed a signature. Sometimes it was a friend inviting me to lunch after work. The reasons didn't really matter. What mattered was knowing that somewhere someone had thought of me. Then retirement arrived. During the first month, the phone still rang. Former coworkers called to ask where certain files were. Someone needed help finding an old report. Another wanted to know how I would have handled a difficult situation. Each conversation made me smile. See, I told myself they still need me, but little by little, the calls became fewer. The questions became simpler. Eventually, they stopped altogether. At first, I blamed technology. Everyone was texting now. Then I blamed busy schedules. Life moves fast. People have responsibilities, I understood. Or at least I tried to. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after retirement, I was organizing a shelf in the garage when I found an old notebook. Inside were hundreds of names, phone numbers, meeting notes, appointments. People I once spoke to almost every single day. Out of curiosity, I started reading through them. I smiled as memories returned. I could picture faces, voices, laughter. Long meetings that felt endless. Celebrations after difficult projects. Moments that once seemed unforgettable. Then a strange thought crossed my mind. How many of these people still remembered me? I counted nearly 300 names. When I finished, I realized something that surprised me. There were fewer than 10 people I still spoke to regularly, less than 10. Not because anyone had been cruel. Not because friendships had been fake. Simply because life had continued moving. People don't stop to look backward for long. They have new meetings, new responsibilities. New people sitting in the chair you once occupied, and perhaps, one day, someone else will replace them too. That realization hurt more than I expected, not because I felt forgotten, but because I finally understood something about human nature. Many relationships are built around shared circumstances. Remove the circumstance, and the relationship quietly fades away. The office wasn't just where I worked. It was where birthdays were celebrated, where jokes were shared over coffee, where people noticed if I looked tired, where someone always asked, "How was your weekend?" Without realizing it, those small conversations had become part of my emotional life. When they disappeared, I thought I was missing people. In reality, I was missing belonging. Those are not the same thing. Belonging is one of the deepest human needs. Long before we worried about success, before money, before status, we simply wanted to know that we had a place in the tribe. A place where our presence mattered. Retirement quietly removes that tribe. Nobody talks about that. Financial advisors teach us how much money we should save. Doctors tell us how to protect our hearts. Fitness experts remind us to keep moving. But very few people ask an equally important question. Who will know if you don't leave your house for 3 days? One rainy Thursday, I decided not to go anywhere. The weather was gloomy. I stayed home reading. Friday came, I stayed home again. Saturday passed just as quietly. Late that evening, I suddenly realized something unsettling. For 3 entire days, Not a single person had wondered where I was. No messages, no calls, no knock on the door. The world had continued exactly as before. That thought settled heavily in my chest. Years earlier, if I had missed one meeting, someone would have called within minutes. Now, I could disappear for days, perhaps even weeks. And life outside my front door would continue without interruption. That realization could have broken me. In fact, for a while it almost did. I began questioning my value. Had all those years meant so little? Had I been important or merely useful? There is a painful difference between the two. Useful people are remembered while they are needed. Valuable people are remembered because of who they are. For months I wrestled with that question. Then one afternoon, while sitting on a park bench watching children chase pigeons, an old man sat beside me. We exchanged polite smiles. After a few minutes, he looked at the children and quietly said, "You know what's strange?" I looked at him. "When I was young," he continued, "I thought people loved me because I was successful." He laughed softly. "It took retirement to teach me that success introduces you to many people. But kindness is what makes them stay." His words stayed with me long after he walked away. That evening, I thought about every relationship I had ever built. Some had been based on business, some on convenience, some on habit, but the ones that survived, the ones still calling after all these years, had nothing to do with my jobs. They remained because somewhere along the way, we had learned to care about each other beyond titles, positions, and responsibilities. Perhaps retirement wasn't exposing the people who had left. Perhaps it was revealing the precious few who had quietly chosen to stay, and maybe, just maybe, those few were enough. Part 3: When your children love you, but no longer need you. People often ask me the same question. What is the hardest part of getting older? Some expect me to talk about aching knees. Others think I'll mention losing friends. A few assume it's the fear of death, but if I'm being truthful, none of those things hurt as much as watching your children slowly build a life that no longer revolves around you. Please don't misunderstand me. This is not a story about ungrateful children, quite the opposite. My children are good people, they work hard, they call when they can. They visit whenever life gives them the chance. They have never stopped loving me. The painful truth is much simpler. Love changes its shape as families grow. When they were little, every problem belonged to me. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every school project, every birthday party. Every broken bicycle, every question ended with the same two words: Dad. I still remember those evenings. I would come home exhausted after work, barely able to keep my eyes open. Yet somehow, the moment I heard those tiny footsteps running toward the front door, my tiredness disappeared. They didn't care what title I held. They didn't know how much money I earned. To them, I was the tallest tree in the forest, the safest place in the world. Children have a beautiful way of making you believe you are stronger than you really are. Then, almost without warnings, they grow up. One day you teach them how to ride a bicycle. The next, they're driving away on their own. One day they ask you to tie their shoes. The next, they're choosing homes, careers, and partners without asking your opinion. That is exactly what we raise them to do, and yet, no one prepares your heart for the success of your own parenting. Because if you have done your job well, your children will eventually need you less. I never thought that success could feel so lonely. There was one moment I will never forget. It was a Saturday afternoon. My wife was watering flowers in the garden. I was sitting in the living room with 2 cups of tea already prepared. Our son had promised to visit around 3 o'clock. At 3, I smiled every time I heard a car outside. At 3:30, I checked my phone, no message. At 4, a text finally arrived. Dad, I'm so sorry. Something came up, we'll come next weekend instead. I stared at those words longer than I should have, not because I was angry. Because I suddenly realized something. Years ago, if I had promised to take him to the park and then canceled, he would have cried. Now, life simply had other priorities. I looked at the untouched cup of tea. Steam was no longer rising from it. I carried it quietly to the sink. My wife noticed my expression. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. They still love us, she whispered. They're just busy building the life we once prayed they would have. Her words stayed with me for days. She was right. Every late night at the office, every sacrifice, every birthday I missed because of work, every difficult decision, every worry, had all been for this very purpose: to give our children the freedom to build lives larger than our own. So why was I feeling betrayed by the very dream I had spent decades creating? Perhaps because love has two different languages. Parents often speak through presence. Children often speak through trust. When my children were young, they needed me to solve their problems. Now, they trust themselves to solve them. That isn't rejection, it's growth. And growth always creates distance, not emotional distance, life distance. There is a difference. One evening, my granddaughter came to visit. She was only 6 years old. She climbed onto my lap, looked straight into my eyes, and asked, "Grandpa, were you little once?" I laughed. I was. Were you scared? Sometimes. Did your daddy help you? Yes. She thought for a moment before asking another question. Who helps you now? For a second, I didn't know how to answer. Children ask the simplest questions. Sometimes they uncover the deepest truths. Who helps me now? The answer wasn't obvious anymore, not because nobody cared, but because I had quietly convinced myself that asking for help meant becoming a burden. Many older people carry this silent fear. We stop calling because we don't want to interrupt. We stop asking because we don't want to trouble anyone. We stop sharing because we don't want our children to worry, little by little. We build invisible walls around our own hearts. Then we wonder why nobody walks through them. One night, I decided to do something different. Instead of waiting for my daughter to call, I called her. No special reason, no emergency. I simply wanted to hear her voice. She answered almost immediately, "Dad, I was just thinking about calling you." We talked for nearly an hour, not about serious things. We laughed about an old family vacation. We remembered the dog that used to steal socks from the laundry basket. She told me about work. I told her about the tomatoes growing in the backyard. Before hanging up, she said something that made me smile for the rest of the evening. "Dad, thank you for calling. Sometimes I get so busy that I don't realize how much I miss talking to you." That sentence changed me. I had spent months believing silence meant I had been forgotten, perhaps. Sometimes silence simply means everyone is waiting for the other person to call first. Since then, I have stopped counting how many times my children call me. Instead, I count how many opportunities I still have to tell them I love them, because one day, neither of us will be able to make that call. And no amount of regret will ever reconnect a phone line that time has already disconnected. Part 4, the mirror I avoided for 40 years. A few months after I retired, I developed a strange habit. Every morning after making coffee, I would walk past the bathroom mirror without looking into it. At first, I didn't even notice I was doing it. Then one day, I caught my own reflection by accident. I stopped. For a long moment, I simply stared. The face looking back at me wasn't unfamiliar. I recognized every wrinkle, every gray hair. Every line carved by years of laughter, worry, responsibility, and quiet sacrifice. What startled me wasn't the man in the mirror. It was the question that appeared in my mind. If no one knew what you used to do, who would you be? I had never asked myself that before. For more than 40 years, I had been busy becoming useful. Useful to my employer, useful to my coworkers, useful to my family. Useful to my community. Every day had a purpose. Every decision affected someone. Every problem demanded a solution. Without realizing it, I had measured my worth by how much I could carry for other people. The heavier the burden, the more valuable I believed I was. Perhaps many of us were taught the same lesson. Work harder, provide more, complain less, keep moving, don't stop, because if you stop, you might discover something you have been running from all along. Retirement forced me to stop. And silence has a curious way of introducing you to yourself. The first few weeks I tried to stay busy. I repaired old furniture, cleaned out closets, organized drawers that hadn't been opened in years. I trimmed the garden, washed the car twice in 1 week, even polished tools that didn't need polishing. Looking back now, I wasn't cleaning my house. I was trying to escape my own thoughts. Busyness can be a very comfortable hiding place. As long as your hands are occupied. Your heart doesn't have to speak, but eventually. There are no more drawers to organize, no more shelves to repaint, no more excuses. One rainy afternoon, I found an old cardboard box hidden in the back of a closet. Inside were pieces of a life I had almost forgotten. A faded photograph of me in my 20s, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the world was still wide open. A notebook filled with sketches. A small harmonica I used to carry everywhere. A stack of handwritten letters tied together with a blue ribbon. I sat on the floor for hours, not reading, remembering. There was a time when I wanted to paint landscapes. A time when I dreamed of learning the piano. A time when I imagined traveling without maps, stopping wherever the road felt beautiful. Somewhere between raising children, paying bills, meeting deadlines, and fulfilling responsibilities. Those dreams quietly stepped aside. Not because they weren't important, but because someone else always seemed to need me more. I don't regret choosing my family, not for a single moment. If I had to do it all again, I would still choose them. But I do regret forgetting that I was also a person worth knowing. We often hear people say, take care of your family, and we should. But almost no one says, don't forget to take care of the stranger you will become if you abandon yourself for 40 years. That stranger was waiting for me in the mirror, patiently, without anger, without blame. Simply waiting for me to finally ask, what do you still love? Not what you're good at, not what made you successful. Not what impressed other people. What makes your soul feel alive? I didn't know the answer. That frightened me more than retirement itself. How could a man spend an entire lifetime becoming successful and still not know what brought him joy? For days, I carried that question with me. Then one morning, I picked up the old harmonica. My fingers were clumsy, the melody was uneven. I missed more notes than I played. If anyone had heard me, they probably would have laughed. But something unexpected happened. For the first time in months, I lost track of time, not because I was busy, because I was present. There is a quiet difference. Busyness makes the hours disappear. Presence makes life return. That afternoon, I realized something I wish I had understood decades earlier. Purpose is not something you retire from. Purpose is something you rediscover. A job can end, a title can be taken away. Even strength eventually fades, but curiosity, wonder, the desire to learn, the ability to create. Those things do not belong to youth. They belong to anyone who is still willing to wake up and ask, what beautiful thing can I discover today? Since then, I have looked into the mirror every morning, not to count new wrinkles. Not to mourn the years that have passed, but to greet the man I spent so long overlooking. Sometimes I smile at him, sometimes I laugh. Sometimes I simply whisper, we still have time, not endless time, but enough. Enough to become friends with ourselves. Enough to forgive the dreams we postponed. Enough to plant something whose shade we may never sit beneath. Enough to discover that the second half of life was never meant to imitate the first. The first half teaches us how to survive. The second half invites us to understand why we survived at all, and perhaps that is the greatest gift retirement ever gave me, not freedom from work, but the chance, at last, to come home to myself. Part 5: The Small Joys That Quietly Saved My Life. People often imagine that healing arrives like a sunrise. One beautiful morning, they believe the sadness disappears. The heart suddenly feels lighter. Life becomes meaningful again. That wasn't my experience. Healing came much more quietly. So quietly, in fact, that I almost missed it. It began with a bird. Every morning just after sunrise, a small sparrow landed on the wooden fence outside my kitchen window. The first morning, I barely noticed it. The second morning, I looked up for a few seconds. By the third morning, I found myself waiting for it. I never knew where it came from. I never gave it food. It stayed only a minute or two before flying away, yet somehow, that tiny visitor gave my mornings a rhythm. It reminded me that life was still unfolding outside my thoughts. One day became another, then another. Without realizing it, I started opening the curtains earlier. I brewed my tea before the bird arrived. I sat quietly by the window, not thinking, not planning, simply watching. For decades, I believed every moment had to produce something. A report, a solution, a paycheck, a result. Retirement slowly taught me a different truth. Not every moment must be productive. Some moments only need to be lived. That lesson changed everything. Soon I planted a few flowers near the porch, nothing extraordinary. Just simple flowers that my wife had always loved. Every morning I watered them. Some days I noticed a new bud. Other days a petal had fallen overnight. For the first time in years I paid attention to things that refused to hurry. Flowers never rush, trees never compete. The sunrise never worries about being late, nature has no ambition. Yet it fulfills its purpose every single day. I began wondering if perhaps we humans had made life far more complicated than it needed to be. One afternoon I walked to the neighborhood bakery. The young woman behind the counter smiled and asked, the usual. For a moment I looked around thinking she must be speaking to someone else. Then she smiled again. No sugar in your coffee, right? I nodded. She remembered such a small thing. A detail so ordinary that many people would forget it before reaching the door. But as I carried my coffee home, I couldn't stop smiling. Somewhere in this busy world, someone had remembered me. Not because I had an important title, not because I held influence. Simply because I had become part of another person's ordinary day. That realization warmed me more than the coffee in my hands. We often underestimate the power of being familiar, a greeting, a smile. The cashier who knows your name. The neighbor who waves every morning. The mail carrier who asks how you're feeling. These tiny moments seem insignificant. Until the day you realize they are quietly stitching your heart back together. One evening, my wife and I sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Years ago, silence between us would have felt awkward. Now, it felt peaceful. She reached for my hand not because she needed to. Not because something was wrong. Simply because after all these years, holding hands still felt like coming home. I looked at her and suddenly understood something. The happiest moments of my retirement had never been the extraordinary ones. They were almost invisible. Sharing breakfast without checking the clock. Listening to rain against the roof. Reading a chapter of a good book before noon. Watching tomatoes ripen in the garden. Laughing because neither of us could remember where we had left the reading glasses. Life hadn't become smaller. My attention had become larger. When we are young, we chase milestones. Graduation, promotion, marriage, a bigger house, more money. Retirement gently changes the question. Instead of asking, what else can I achieve? It begins asking, what have I been overlooking all these years? The answer surprised me. Peace had always been available. I had simply been too busy to notice it. One afternoon while walking through the park, I watched an elderly man feeding ducks by the pond. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply smiled each time another duck waddled toward him. As I passed, he looked up and said, "You know what I've learned?" I smiled. "What?" "The older I get, the less happiness shouts." He tossed another piece of bread into the water. "It whispers." I carried those words home with me. Happiness whispers. It whispers through birdsong before sunrise. Through warm tea on a cold morning. Through old songs that still remember your youth. Through grandchildren who fall asleep on your shoulder. Through conversations that have nowhere important to go. Through evenings when nothing extraordinary happens. And yet your heart feels full. Looking back now, I no longer believe retirement stole my happiness. It simply changed the place where I was searching for it. For most of my life, I looked for happiness in achievement. Now, I find it in attention, not in having more. But in finally noticing what has been beside me all along. Perhaps that is why growing older can become such a beautiful season. Not because life becomes easier, but because we slowly stop asking life to be extraordinary and begin allowing ordinary moments to become extraordinary enough. Finale, if I could speak to my younger self. Sometimes late in the afternoon, when the sunlight stretches across the living room floor, I imagine sitting across from the man I used to be. He's about 35, his hair is still dark, his shoulders are strong, his calendar is full, his mind never stops racing. He believes he's running out of time. I look at him for a long moment. He doesn't recognize me, not yet, how could he? To him, growing old is something that happens to other people. He has no idea that one day he'll wake up with silver hair, slower steps, and a heart carrying memories heavier than anything he has ever lifted with his hands. If I had just a few minutes with him, I don't think I would warn him about the stock market, or career choices, or even money. I'd tell him something much simpler. Don't rush through ordinary days. One afternoon you'll give anything to have one of them back. I would tell him to stay at the dinner table a little longer, to put the phone away more often, to hug his children one extra time before they run outside to play. Because one day they'll be too busy raising children of their own. And you'll spend an entire afternoon smiling at old photographs, wondering where those years disappeared. I'd tell him not to postpone joy. Don't wait for retirement to learn the guitar. Don't wait until 65 to watch the sunrise. Don't save your favorite cup for special occasions. Life has a quiet habit of becoming the special occasion while we're busy waiting for one. I'd also tell him something I spent decades misunderstanding. Your worth is not measured by how exhausted you are at the end of the day. The world often applauds people who sacrifice everything, but it rarely asks what those sacrifices cost. There is honor in hard work. But there is also wisdom in knowing when enough is enough. One day, no one will remember how many late nights you spent at the office, but your children will remember whether you were there when they needed you. Your spouse will remember the conversations you made time for. Your friends will remember whether you listened, and your own heart will remember whether you ever truly lived the life you were working so hard to build. If I could speak to that younger man one last time, before he stood up to leave, I think I would smile and say, when retirement finally comes, don't be afraid. It isn't the end of your usefulness. It's the beginning of your honesty. Because retirement has a strange way of removing every costume we wear. The title disappears, the office disappears, the deadlines disappear. The applause grows quiet, and eventually, all that remains is the person underneath. At first that can feel frightening, but over time, it becomes incredibly freeing. You stop trying to impress people who were never paying attention. You stop chasing things that never brought peace. You stop confusing success with meaning. And somewhere along that slower road, you begin noticing life again. The sound of rain against the roof. The warmth of a hand you've held for 40 years. The laughter of grandchildren echoing through the house. The smell of fresh bread. The comfort of an old sweater. The miracle of waking up one more morning. These things were always priceless. I was simply too busy to notice. People often ask whether I miss working. Sometimes I do. I miss the conversations, the teamwork. The feeling that today's effort would shape tomorrow, but if I'm honest, I don't miss the man who believed he had to earn the right to slow down. Today, my mornings begin with tea instead of urgency. My afternoons are measured by sunlight instead of meetings. And my evenings end not with unfinished tasks, but with gratitude. Not because life became perfect. It didn't. I still lose people I love. I still worry. I still have days when loneliness quietly knocks on the door. The difference is, I no longer invite it to stay. Instead, I open the curtains. I call someone I care about. I take a walk. I water the flowers. I play a few imperfect notes on an old harmonica. I remind myself that happiness has never demanded perfection, only presence. If you are listening to my voice today, and retirement feels heavier than you expected, please remember this: you are not behind, you are not forgotten. And you are certainly not finished. Some of the most meaningful chapters in a book are written after the great battles are over. Perhaps this season of your life was never meant to be about proving your value to the world. Perhaps it is finally time to discover your value to yourself. Before I leave you today, I'd like to ask one small favor. Tomorrow morning, before checking your phone, before turning on the television, before the noise of the world finds you, Step outside for just 5 quiet minutes. Listen to the birds, feel the morning air. Notice how the light touches the trees. And ask yourself one gentle question. What kind of life do I still want to live? Not the life people expect from you, not the life you regret. The life that is still waiting for you. Because as long as your heart can still wonder, as long as your eyes can still notice beauty, as long as you can still offer kindness to another soul, your story is not ending. It is simply being written in a quieter language, and sometimes, the quietest chapters become the ones we remember forever. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Until we meet again, take care of your heart. It has carried you farther than you know.